So, let's have that face us. Let's maybe go behind those two guys and kind of in the middle of them so I can really see it.
I'm gonna get a case of stage fright.
So we're gonna go roughly here.
Yeah, I can see it.
And then when I tell you to, Bill, you're just gonna give me a real quick snap. Okay?
Right here. And then I can stay in for a couple minutes?
No. Then I need you to get out of it.
You'll be listening to the cars.
Hi, I'm Bob Aragoni, and I've lived in Nicasio since 1962.
Hi, I'm Rocky Schoen, full-time resident since 1977.
I'm Steve Lewis, and I've been a full-time resident of Nicasio since 1991.
Okay, I was born in San Francisco. I went to Drake High School. I went to College of Marin for a year after high school, and then the University of Oregon.
And did you spend time in West Marin when you were young?
You know, in those days, all my friends were from Fairfax, and we used to hunt and fish a lot. You know, my family was from Fairfax originally, and they basically lived off the land in the old days. So we grew up hunting and fishing around West Marin.
Rocky, tell us where you were born.
I was born in San Francisco, moved to Santa Fe, and lived there until I went off to college. And I went to college. I went to high school at Santa Fe High, then University of California, Berkeley. My folks bought the old schoolhouse in '56, and I came out on weekends. My dad was an attorney, and he was a retired judge.
Bob, I guess the story we're most interested in from your perspective really starts around 1960 or so with the completion of the reservoir. And can you describe what the development pressures were initiated by construction of the reservoir? What steps were taken by you and others to manage those pressures?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the reservoir being a catalyst for development pressure. So it started with the ranchers. They were the initiators of the effort to save Nicasio Valley because they're the ones who voted against joining the Marin MMWD when the lake was built because they didn't want to have water that would increase pressure to cause development. If there was no water, there wouldn't be any pressure to develop and people coming in here and buying land and whatever. At least that's what I remember. Of course, they've been stewards of this land before the homeowners and before the Design Review Committee. If it weren't for them, there wouldn't be anything to preserve. So it really starts with them. I always love this landscape in this area. Rocky's dad approached me. I had been a friend of Rocky's dad, you know, prior to moving to Nicasio. My brother was a friend of his dad, and I therefore became acquainted with Ray Schoen. So Ray knew I was an architect. Ray is the one that was the catalyst behind the formation of the Nicasio Landowners Association. He recognized that there needed to be some kind of an organization that would function as the overseer for development. He, I think, developed Homeowners Association bylaws, which included a design review committee. And so he asked me to become the first chairman of the design review committee. And I had just graduated from school. I was just starting my practice, and I didn't have the confidence that I did in later years. So I said, hey, Ray, you know, yeah, I'll do it, but I don't want to do it alone. So I don't know how Alan Cooper got involved, but he was, let's say, a co-chair with me of the design review committee initially.
Bob, when you started out then as head or co-head of design review, what was your philosophy or your goals or your guidelines that you wanted to follow in preserving the area and having a cogent, workable design review approach?
Initially, Steve, I mean, it was really difficult because we had very little guidance in terms of operating the design review committee. There really was no master plan. I mean, as an architect, I think that I knew something about how to develop land and protect the landscape by, you know, there are various simple tools like trying to screen houses from view, using landforms or vegetation to promote that, buildings and trees, not out in the middle of open pastures. There were some pretty outlandish proposals that we tried to prevent, but we had very little to back us up in terms of statutes or planning documents or whatever. And we got into some pretty feisty kinds of relationships with homeowners. It was absolutely no fun. Somebody would come in and there'd be a house that'd be right out in the open. What could we do? We just struggled with trying to get a design that fit in, that was low, that was unobtrusive. We dealt with the colors and the materials such that we wanted them to be soft and fit in and disappear. I was an autocrat, and I probably stepped on a lot of toes, and there was no such thing as compromising for me. We had to get it done right because there was no way we could allow for the place to get destroyed by poor development. I just couldn't accept it. So we fought, we argued, we pissed people off for sure. And I know I did, but I didn't care. Nicasio was the most important thing. I had to go to planning commission hearing or go meet with the county staff to argue our point because the county staff, they didn't care. We were the guys that were cared because we lived out here. The little blurb, Nicasio didn't just happen. It didn't just happen.
My line.
Yeah, that was Rocky's line.
Dwight D. Eisenhower's line. It just happened. 8 years of his presidency, not one American soldier was killed in combat. Someone asked him about that, and he said, it didn't just happen. So I got that line from him. It didn't just happen.
Your guidelines included preserving view corridors, screening with vegetation and rocks where houses were going to go, avoiding building on ridges, that type of thing. Avoiding, in other words, this area becoming like Terra Linda.
Exactly.
Is that fair?
For instance, this property, the location of this house up in the base of the canyon here, keeping it low so that it wouldn't have any impact on the church or this beautiful giant pasture surrounding the church. Maintaining that in a single parcel, not subdivided with fences, not filled with buildings. We tried to make sure that buildings were located so that they would have a sense of place. This property is an illustration of that.
Give us a few sentences on what Nicasio was like in the 1960s and 70s when, in the early days.
Yeah.
What was it like actually living out here for you?
I felt very isolated. I was the only full-time resident in my stretch of Lucas Valley Road. You really felt alone out here. I did. Sometimes it was even scary. I used to have people moonlighting out in front of the house, all hours shooting rifles off, killing deer. One of these days it's going to come bullets going to come through the house. There was nobody on Lucas Valley Road. I used to commute to San Francisco. I never met another car coming this way, all the way to the freeway. Put my high beams on, never ever did I dim them because there was never another car going the other way. It was neat. It was wonderful. I was a single guy and pretty young, and all my friends would say, Bob, what are you doing moving to Nicasio? Why, you should be in the city where all the action is. I grew up in San Francisco, so man, I didn't want any part of it. I love the country. I love being out here.
Then at some point, there was a plan to build a highway out through the Nicasio Valley. And can you talk a little bit about how that plan was floated and what you and maybe your brother also did to kill it?
My brother ran against Ernest Kettenhoffen, who was on the Board of Supervisors. I wouldn't say they were necessarily pro-development, but they certainly weren't conservation-minded. And there was a freeway system, part of the state master plan, an extension of 580, a freeway coming up Lucas Valley, over Big Rock, down Halleck Creek, out to Point Reyes. And there were freeways all up and down the coast in Marin County. And my brother was elected on a platform of basically eliminating that freeway system from the state master plan. And he was successful in that. He and his colleagues on the Board of Supervisors, I think, were the initiators of the A60 zoning. It was a 60-acre minimum parcel if you were to subdivide the land. And the purpose of it was to discourage a development where you would have far higher densities that would be a catalyst for development companies to come in, buy big parcels of land and create a subdivision, such as lower, Lucas Valley. The A60 really was the generator of allowing Nicasio to remain as it was with large open space and preserve the ranches.
So you developed, though, design review guidelines.
We needed an actual master plan. I had a relationship with Mark Riesenfeld, who was the county planner. We had a lot of expertise, so I wrote the development standard myself, the principles by which we wanted to apply to development. And they're still in effect. I read them the other night, and they still make a lot of sense. I mean, they're just simple principles, really. Locate property lines in the trees. Don't cross the middle of a meadow with a property line, because then you're going to have a fence down that property line, and one side of the meadow is going to be split in two. Somebody on one side might treat it differently than somebody on the other side. You can see the impact of that.
We're fortunate that we had Bob's brother, Pete Aragoni, as on the Board of Supervisors. And then when he decided to get out of politics, he was succeeded by Gary Giacomini. And Gary, both Pete and Gary were very conservation-minded and gave us the political support at the county. So the design and review guidelines were followed, and Bob was listened to.
And design review in Nicasio was deferred to more often than not in the recommendations that it made to the county on various proposed developments as a result of Bob.
Marin County had a first-class planning department, which is, I would say, unique, certainly. It was great to have them behind us, really.
Bob, let's turn now to just some of the specific projects that show how your development and design philosophy met actual proposals. And let's just start with approaching Nicasio from the west, Nicasio Valley Road and Point Reyes Petaluma Road. Tell us about any projects that come to mind there that you worked on.
I don't know that there were any documents or regulation. There was nothing. Okay, so when the first development came before us for review, it was the property that's now owned by Stan Lohr. I got together with Alan. I remember walking the site, being out there, trying to figure out what we were going to do. It was very simple. We thought, well, we've got to preserve this beautiful big pasture. So why not require that all the houses are located on the other side of the hill? That's the backdrop to the meadow on the south side. And that simple requirement is the reason why that property along Nicasio Valley Road is in open space, not filled with a bunch of ranchettes, and all with different vegetation, different style, different this and that, and it wouldn't be long before the whole was ruined. All along Nicasio Valley Road, between the bridge at the intersection of Lucas Valley Road and Nicasio Valley Road, all the property on the west side of the road up to where the road went into the tree cover. We said, okay, there was a simple line which was formed by the creek and all the vegetation in the creek. We decided that all of the meadow land between the creek and the road should be preserved in open space, so that let's require that all the buildings be on the other side of the creek. That basically took care of the southern approach to Nicasio. We already took care of the western approach. So just simple things like that didn't prevent anybody from doing anything. We used to say that all the time. Hey, we're not here to tell you you can't develop it. We're just here to help ensure that the development is done according to some sound principles. There was a big subdivision proposal for Big Rock. I remember seeing a plan where there were houses located way high up on the side of the hills behind the ranch, and it was a disaster, really. And what prevented that from happening was George bought the ranch. The benefit of George Lucas is he came in and bought so much land, and in the process of developing Skywalker Ranch, it was preserved in open space easements that resulted from the county requiring some quid pro quo for development, which wasn't really permitted in any zoning designation that existed. So, most of the land around Skywalker Ranch is in open space primarily because George bought it and nobody else came in and bought it and tried to subdivide it. There's so many things that happened, luckily or what, in West Marin. George was one of them, right? How many communities have somebody like George Lucas that comes in and buys 5 or 6 or I don't know how many ranches he bought, and they're all in open space currently. It's a huge amount of ground. George obviously loves the landscape as well.
Let's go down to the Y where Lucas Valley and Nicasio Valley roads meet. Was there some proposal for a house there right on Nicasio Valley Road by Jerry Flax in the 1970s?
Yeah, they proposed a house that was a bridge that spanned the canyon. It was about, I think it was like halfway up the mountain. When I first saw it, I just broke out laughing. I couldn't believe it, because it was so ridiculous. Jerry, don't do that. You should locate the house where the original rancher located his house, because that was probably the best place on the site. And he bought into that. So we eliminated the house up on the hill. And so, you can't see the house today. We did the design review on Winfield Station, and of course, the buildings there are located where the original ranch buildings were located.
It's now Killam Farm.
So the property between that location and the Nicasio Square was an open pasture meadow. So we wanted to maintain that open pasture all the way into the town square. The builder, he apparently had some deal, a side deal with the owners. They wanted to build a house at the north end of that big pasture, and we were able to stop that. Hey, that wasn't part of the master plan.
Okay, well, let's move now to the town square. Many people would say it's miraculously unchanged, at least in the last 40 years and probably the last 80 years.
Ever since I've been here.
Yeah. Did you develop guidelines that were specific to the village for new and remodeled construction around the village?
We did, yes. We wrote guidelines that would apply to people that, let's say, bought an older building and wanted to remodel it or tear it down and rebuild it, but mostly remodeling and new buildings as well, in terms of trying to describe a style, elements and principles within the style, but mostly centered around traditional architecture that would be prevalent, let's say, in West Marin. Nothing's ever happened around the town square, except for, what was it, the Lot 1 proposal?
Glenn Kirch, who owned the rancho, owned the town square. He ended up selling it to the community and the county. Landowners Association bought the town square with the county, half landowners, half county.
And ultimately, the county ended up deeding their half interest to the Landowners Association.
Right. Well, after we ended up purchasing Lot 1.
Let's go back to Lot 1, which I had some personal involvement in, and I know Rocky did. I think I was head of the Landowners Association when the McBurneys approached the Landowners Association and said, we want to build this McMansion here. Tell us what your involvement and reaction was to that.
I didn't have a lot of involvement with that. Rocky and you, Steve, and a lot of the community were the force behind the attempt to prevent that house from happening.
Thankfully, we had Steve Kinsey's support as a supervisor saying this really is not an appropriate development, 10,000 square foot building, even a 5,000 square foot building on Lot 1. And that led to the McBurneys ultimately giving up and going away.
Well,
Do you have a different recollection?
I mean, somewhat in that they were very astute politically,
Yeah.
and they went throughout the community, but they came to me to try to garner my support. And I remember telling them no, because I knew what they were trying to build was a big ranch style.
Yeah, so, this whole development here, everything else is behind and you can't really see it. This is really a significant lot, and the spot was back there, and somehow it got moved out, the building envelope got moved out, and the people who were building it wanted a really huge home, and it was going to read even larger than it was. And so after a lot of contentious back and forth with the landowner and the community, they finally got approved for a 5,000 square foot home, but as it was no longer their dream home, they ended up selling it to a very generous couple from San Anselmo who had been following all the controversy in the newspaper, and they offered it to the community for $500,000. They paid $800,000, offered it to the community for $500,000. We had to raise that amount of money. Well, we did all we could, and we got up to $300,000, and we kind of hit a brick wall. So at that moment, we'd kind of saved, kept our powder dry, and at that time, we went to George Lucas with a specific amount, and he came up with the whole $200,000, permitting us to buy the lot 1 for $500,000, and keeping this in permanent open space. And as you drive in, it still looks like, the town that time forgot.
That's clearly a great success story about preserving the square.
One last thing, I remember at the time, we built a sign that we put at the square, and as I recall, it said something like, "With your help on this site will be built," and then in large caps, absolutely nothing.
Let's cover a couple more topics. The Frankie Ranch, the transfer of development rights, and the pumpkin patch. Can you say a few words about how those unfolded?
I don't really recall how that conversation all started, where the concept of transfer of development rights came into play, or who initiated all of that. But certainly the Design Review Committee was involved and was very supportive of that entire movement toward development rights transfer.
I'm Rick LaFranchi. I was born and raised here in Nicasio and lived here for many, many years, and still consider Nicasio to be my home. Our family, as all others in West Marin, was a large family. There was multiple owners, and they all shared ownership of the home ranch. And they knew at some point they'd have to make some type of arrangement to accommodate the others. It was either sell the ranch in its entirety, malt it, which malt was a brand new organization at that time and not relatively well known or understood. And the idea of transferring development rights onto that property actually originated in part with Peter Edwards, the local real estate agent. And it was suggested to purchase the property and then transfer the development rights on there. They had community support to do that because we were saving the home ranch by doing it. And it also had support at both the county level as well. Collaborative community, event, and that they engaged people like Bob Aragoni, to help, with the layout and the way things were structured. And the idea that was so appealing about that particular property was that it was out of sight. You really couldn't see it from the county road. It didn't really have any impact on the aesthetic view of Nicasio, And so it just made sense that this is the place to put those 17 lots that they were allowed to, develop. One of the design concepts for the development was to kind of cluster the houses, and the idea was to cluster them so you have kind of a concentrated yet not overcrowded development, again, adjacent to the community, but not visible to the community, and that was really important. This ranch we're on here is 477 acres. My father had long wanted to buy this ranch. At that time, the value of ranches had gone up quite substantially from what they'd been before, because there was a development possibility with them. And so what he did was he was able to engage Malt to buy the development rights to the property, and we bought the land and the agricultural rights. Obviously, we can't ever develop this ranch, and it's what it is today in perpetuity. So I think it's had a huge impact on West Marin. It's really saved agriculture. It would be dramatically different because in 1980, when Malt started, it was when they were able to buy those development rights and retire them. That's when things really started happening in a positive direction. I think Bob's contribution to this community is unmeasurable. I think he's had such a huge impact because what Bob brings to the table is a great knowledge, huge vision, and also just even greater credibility. That if Bob says something, if Bob sees something, people believe it and understand it and appreciate it. And I just think all the elements that he's done, in part, a huge one to me was his older brother Pete getting elected to the County Board of Supervisors back in 1970 and changing a 3-2 vote in favor of being a part of the state highway system, which would have had 3 highways going through Nicasio, to changing that to where they withdrew. And the impact that had on West Marin, you can't measure. It goes far beyond anything we can even comprehend, because this whole area would have been nothing but houses, extensive development throughout this entire area. And Pete, and I believe Bob was right behind him, because I'm sure if Bob had said, no, let him develop it, it makes sense, that's likely the way it would have gone. But he chose to go on the idea of preserving it. And I think that Bob's contribution, like I say, will be recognized by generations to come. I have no doubt.
Bob, while we're on this subject, just tell me what your take is on the job that Malt has done since it was set up in 1980.
Well, I think Malt's done an excellent job preserving ranch properties by purchasing development rights that allow the families to basically deal with funding purchase of family members that didn't want to stay on the land or whatever. So I think it's been great, right, for Marin County for sure. But Malt didn't come on the scene until a lot of the work was done by the Board of Supervisors in the A60 zoning. The countywide plan split the county into the urban eastern corridor and the western, basically rural corridor. And so that's where A60 zoning came into play, stipulating that development really should happen in existing urban areas. Malt came along and continued that entire process.
You've done a lot of work for Nicasio out front as on design review, and I know you've also run a major architectural firm and represented a lot of high-profile clients on big projects. Can you just give us a brief description of some of the people you've represented and the buildings that or structures you've been involved in designing?
We did a lot of work at Skywalker Ranch for George. There was an initial architect and the master plan. I got involved. We were hired to redo the master plan, which I did myself. And then George decided he wanted to do the tech building. He was used to using storyboards with his movies, right? Do a movie and you have 15 scenes and you do 15 storyboards that pretty much outline the kind of visual context of the film. Paintings of the scenes. We started by actually doing storyboards of different parts of the building, and then we'd assemble that into a building. So we were putting together these buildings like we were putting together a movie. So that was working for George. Very interesting. That experience in doing film-related and sound-related facilities got us into, we started doing a lot of work for Disney and people like that. We did the master plan for the Disney MGM studio tour in Orlando, Florida. We did the master plan for the Paris Disneyland, Tokyo Disneyland. You know, the perception is that Disney did most of that work in-house themselves. They didn't. They hired us to do it. The National Audiovisual Archive for the Library of Congress in Culpeper, Virginia. And it's a project that was paid for by David Packard of the Packard Humanities Institute. He's the son of the founder of Hewlett Packard. I think it's the largest facility of this kind in the world.
Looking back, what do you see as the biggest change in Nicasio or the Nicasio area in the last 60 years or so?
And I think it's gratifying to see that basically the landscape is intact. And a lot of that resulted from the work that the Design Review Committee did, the County Planning Department, and certainly the community. Here we are, and we're pretty much, protected from any kind of event that might start to cause the landscape to be destroyed.
Are you optimistic about the ability of Nicasio to continue to survive as a peaceful, pastoral, unique place to live?
I'm optimistic. Everything that's developable has been developed in the context of the master plan, and the zoning and everything else. There aren't any parcels that I know of that are just sitting there waiting for somebody to buy and propose a development of one sort or the other.
Rocky, what do you think?
I'm optimistic, like Bob said, most of the development pressure is off because it's already been developed. But everything that we've done out here, there's laws that protect us, but laws are written by men and men can change laws. So I think the community has to remain ever vigilant. If they want the community to remain more or less the same, they're going to have to continue to be involved, and they can't just expect other people and the right thing just to happen automatically. Things don't just happen. People come out here and they think Nicasio and how wonderful and that you've maintained it, but there's a lot of work. So visually you can't tell the difference between now and 50, 60 years ago. It's pretty much the same.
Last question for both of you. Is there anything I should have asked you about Nicasio, design review issues, development, past, the future, that I didn't ask you that you want to comment on?
Yeah, just the people, the support, going to the county and speaking out, countless people and the people who volunteer, yourself, many times president of the landowners, Stan Lohr, all the work he's done over the years, the support of the ranchers, Will Frankie and the Dulcinis, and there's still ranches out here today, the Gallaghers, they were all supportive of the landowners and what we were doing for the community. And so, we were conduits, but we had support of the community. And anyone who's ever gone to the county, I want to thank, because it's a thankless job. But if you don't show that you care, they won't care.
So we had quite a batch of expertise. I guess the only thing I want to say was, I was only one member of the design review committee. There were a lot of people that were involved. 3 architects and 1 contractor on the design review committee. That's kind of unprecedented for a small rural location to have that much expertise on a body like that. So there were a lot of things that came to pass relative to Nicasio over the years, somehow all of which added up to what it is today, right? I mean, the removal of the freeways, the A60 zoning, no water from the dam, the Nicasio Landowners Association, the development standards, the design review committee, these were all, important. Everything kind of fell into place. We did a lot of good work.